They laughed when she bought the rusted 45-seat Hyundai bus. Moldy, half buried in weeds, it looked more like scrap metal than salvation. But by the time she opened the hidden steel box under its floor and uncovered secrets that spanned borders, wars, and her own family, those same people stood silent. What she found inside that bus didn't just rewrite local history, it gave it a pulse. Before we turn the key on this unbelievable story, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this stir something in you, restoration, mystery, and rediscovered legacy, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's tale is even more unforgettable than this one. The first time Riley Monroe saw it, the sun was beating down hard on the overgrown yard behind Jensen's scrapyard. Most people passed it without a second glance, an old, oxidized Hyundai Aero sitting flat on 3 rotted tires, its faded white paint blistered by time, its long frame swallowed in weeds. But Riley stood still, eyes locked on the bus like it had whispered something. She wasn't even supposed to be there, just tagging along with her cousin to find a spare fuel pump. But there it was, hulking and forgotten, tucked beneath a collapsing tin awning and half covered in vines. It looked like something out of a dream she hadn't had yet. Riley stepped closer, brushing aside a thorny branch. The door hung partially open, and inside she could just make out the dusty outlines of blue cloth seats, rows and rows of them. She ducked inside, boots crunching over shattered glass and old candy wrappers. It smelled like mildew and diesel, and the faintest trace of cologne. A bird had made a nest behind the driver's seat. The steering wheel was cracked in 3 places. Every surface screamed forgotten. But she didn't see junk. She saw structure. She saw history. God, Riley, that thing's a coffin on wheels, her cousin Jared said, squinting at it from the gravel path. It's not even worth hauling. But she didn't respond. Her fingers traced the edge of the dash, eyes scanning the ceiling. A strange bulge in the panel above the windshield caught her attention. It looked like something had been stuffed there years ago. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Some things needed patience. Some things needed silence. That night, she couldn't sleep. The shape of the bus haunted her, its presence, its emptiness. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a question. She looked up old models on her phone. A 1994 Hyundai Aero, manufactured during a time of regional tensions, used in everything from school transport to military logistics. She dug deeper, and one detail stopped her cold. A handful of units were quietly repurposed for off-grid refugee evacuation routes during a volatile period in Southeast Asia. Few records, no images. The buses vanished after their missions were complete. Erased. But Riley had seen something in that frame, a sturdiness that didn't match the junk around it. By morning, she was back at the yard with $800 in cash. Jensen scratched his chin, confused. "You want that?" he asked, pointing toward the beast like it might still bite. "I was gonna chop it for parts next week." "I'll haul it," she said, firm. "Whole thing, no cuts," he shrugged. "Hell, you're doing me a favor. Take it." As the flatbed dragged the old Hyundai out of the brush, Riley stood with her arms crossed, boots planted, watching like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, even if the rest of the world didn't yet. By the time it landed in the cracked concrete of her father's old garage, now her own, the sun was already dipping low. The bus settled in with a metallic groan, its windows catching the last light of day. She walked slowly down the aisle between the seats. Dust stirred in the golden air. On the far left wall near the rear exit, someone had etched a name barely visible beneath grime and rust. Not her name. Not anyone she knew. But it was familiar. Her throat tightened. Maybe it was coincidence, or maybe, just maybe, she had parked something in her garage that had been looking for her just as long as she'd been looking for a purpose. And under that cracked bus ceiling, she was finally about to find both. The morning after she brought the bus home, Riley woke up with grease on her hands and 100 doubts banging around in her skull. She hadn't even told her mom yet. Just said she was working on something big. The kind of big that makes people worry, or laugh, or both. But that was fine. They always laughed first. Let them. She brewed a pot of coffee, tied her hair back, and stepped into the garage like she was stepping into a chapel. The bus loomed in the shadows, massive, still, and strangely dignified, like it had been waiting to exhale for years, and still wasn't sure it was allowed to. She circled it with a flashlight, taking notes in a spiral-bound pad her dad used to carry on big teardown jobs. Rust ran like veins along the undercarriage. Every window was scratched or cloudy. The wiring behind the dash had been chewed by something, rats, maybe, or time. She popped open the hood with effort. It groaned like it hadn't moved since the Clinton administration. The engine was intact, but barely. It looked like a fossil, like something excavated instead of built. But she didn't flinch. She didn't sigh. She just whispered to it, low and calm. "We're gonna bring you back." By noon, she had pressure-washed the exterior and started gutting the inside. She pulled seat cushions, soaked in mildew, pried open vent covers, cleared out a bird nest and a family of very offended spiders. Behind the last row of seats, she found a folded tarp and an old metal clipboard with faint writing. The ink had bled from moisture, but one phrase still clung to the page: "Manifest complete. Return via Laos route." Her brow furrowed. Laos? That wasn't a school route. That wasn't even regional. That was international. She kept digging, under the fifth seat on the passenger side, beneath cracked foam and a rusted bolt. She found something else. The floor had a slight ridge. She ran her fingers over it, knelt down, and knocked. Hollow. That was no design feature. She grabbed a screwdriver and started chipping at the edge. After a few minutes of prying, a section of metal shifted a square panel, about 18 inches wide, held in place by two tiny screws long since rusted through. She pulled it open and blinked. Inside was a small steel compartment, lined in something like rubber, empty, except for one thing: a military-grade dog tag on a frayed cord. She held it up to the light. The name had been partially scratched out, but the last 4 digits of the ID number burned into her brain like fire. 3084. She stood up slowly, mouth dry. That number meant something. She'd seen it before. Her father had a small photo frame on his desk, tucked behind invoices and blueprints. In it, a photo of 3 men in combat fatigues standing beside a bus. This bus. And one of those men had the number 3084 scribbled on his shirt sleeve in marker. She stumbled back a step, gripping the dog tag like it might vanish. This wasn't just some rust bucket rescue project anymore. This was personal. This was legacy. And whatever story this bus had carried, it had somehow made its way back to her through time, through scrap heaps, through silence. Everyone else thought she'd gambled on a junker. But Riley was beginning to realize something deeper. She hadn't just saved this bus from the yard. It might be saving her right back. She didn't sleep that night. Riley sat at her workbench under the dim yellow hum of the overhead bulb, staring at the dog tag on the table like it was an oracle. She'd cleaned it gently with an old toothbrush and a dab of metal polish, but the scratches across the name hadn't faded. Just deep enough to obscure. Like someone wanted the identity partially erased. But why leave the tag at all? And why tuck it under a floor panel, in a place no mechanic would ever think to check? Unless it wasn't hidden from someone. Maybe it was left for someone. Like a message trapped in a bottle, waiting to be uncorked years too late. At sunrise, Riley grabbed her pry tools and a headlamp. She needed to know what else this bus was keeping quiet. The floorboards creaked under her boots as she made her way up the aisle. She started near the driver's side rear tire, well tracing edges, tapping metal, listening for hollows. It didn't take long. 3 rows forward from where she'd found the tag, a section of the floor rang slightly different, lighter. She pulled the seat bolts, peeled back the rotting rubber liner, and there it was, another hidden compartment. This one welded more intentionally, with a recessed latch like it was made to be opened from the inside. She clicked it open, expecting dust. Maybe an old map, maybe nothing. But inside was a weatherproof satchel, olive green, military issue. Riley's hands trembled as she pulled it out, heart pounding so loud she didn't hear the hammering rain starting outside. She placed it on the bench and unzipped it slowly, bracing for disappointment. But there was no disappointment inside. First, a stack of documents in plastic sleeves, old, yellowing with time, typed on brittle paper with official stamps in a language she couldn't read. Some were marked redacted in thick black strokes. Others bore faded UN emblems, humanitarian relief forms, transit records, names, dates, routes. Then, a smaller zip pouch. Inside, a handful of black and white photographs. One showed the bus, parked near what looked like a jungle clearing. In front of it, a group of civilians, women, children, and 3 men in uniform. One of them was her father, younger, thinner, smiling in a way she hadn't seen since before the accident. Another photo showed the same group boarding the bus, urgency in their postures, a woman gripping a toddler with terror in her eyes. Riley blinked. That toddler had the same almond-shaped eyes and high cheekbones her mother had. No, that was impossible. She flipped the photo over. Scrawled in faded blue ink were 5 words. She made it out. Laos, 1,997. Riley staggered back like someone had hit her. Her mother had never spoken about Laos, only that she'd been sponsored to the States after a bad time. She'd never even said how she got here. Riley stared at the photo again. The woman, the child, the bus. Her hands began to shake. This wasn't restoration anymore. It was revelation. Somehow, impossibly, the vehicle she had rescued from rust and weeds, the one everyone laughed at, had once carried her own family across a border, out of danger, and into the future that had created her. And now, 28 years later, it was in her garage. She sat down, overwhelmed, every part of her buzzing with disbelief, and something deeper, like a door inside her, had cracked open, and she was seeing through time. This bus hadn't been waiting for a mechanic. It had been waiting for her. It took Riley 3 tries to dial the number. Her mother answered on the second ring with a tired but warm voice, the kind that had soothed every fever and heartbreak of her childhood. "Riley, everything okay?" There was a pause before she spoke. "Mom, where exactly were you before you came to the States?" Another pause. Longer. Tighter. "Why? I need to know. Please. No more vague answers. No more skipping over the hard parts." Her mother sighed, a long, worn-out breath. "Laos, why are you asking me this now?" Riley didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the photograph in her hand, the one with the woman clutching the child, standing beside the bus that now sat in her garage. "Because I think I found the bus." Silence. Not the kind that comes from confusion, the kind that comes from memory being dragged into the light. Her mother finally whispered. "The bus was white. Rusted. The driver never gave his name." Riley swallowed. "Dad was in the photo too. I told him never to talk about that time," her mother said, voice barely audible now. "We made a deal. That if we made it out, we would build a new life. That we wouldn't let what happened define us." "But it does," Riley whispered back. "And now it's in my garage." Her mother didn't speak again, just cried softly on the other end of the line. Riley didn't push. Some truths need their own space to breathe. When the call ended, Riley spent the rest of the afternoon pulling more seats, checking every panel, hunting every screw. And that's when she found it wedged behind the 3rd row in a plastic sleeve, taped beneath a metal bar, a faded photo of a woman standing proudly in front of the Hyundai. She looked to be in her early 30s, a soft strength in her shoulders, hair braided and tucked beneath a scarf. Her smile was restrained but fierce, the kind of smile you give after surviving something no one else could understand. On the back of the photo was handwriting, familiar handwriting, her father's. She risked everything. We owed her everything. Riley sat down hard on the floor of the bus, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at that photo like it was holy. This wasn't just about her family anymore. This woman wasn't her mother. She was someone else. Someone who'd helped lead people to safety, who'd driven this bus through border patrols and checkpoints and jungle roads under threat. Someone who never made it into the history books. That photo was her monument. And this bus, this rusted, sagging, overlooked beast, had once been her cathedral. Riley stood up slowly and traced her fingers along the metal framing of the aisle, whispering under her breath. Not just a restoration, a resurrection. Because in every bolt, every scratch, every dent in that bodywork, there were people. There were stories. There was bravery. And maybe the world had forgotten them, but she wouldn't. By the time the weekend rolled around, word had already started to spread. Not about the documents or the dog tag, those stayed locked in Riley's drawer, away from curious eyes, but about the bus itself. About her bus. That the girl in the old Monroe garage had dragged a 45-seat rust bucket back from the dead and was stripping it to the bones like she meant to give it new lungs. A couple of older mechanics from the next town stopped by just to see it. One said it reminded him of the models used in military outposts across Asia in the 90s. The other just whistled and muttered, "Looks like it's got ghosts." Riley didn't disagree. She had the front end jacked up now, rusted wheels removed, suspension shot to hell. But it was the engine bay she kept circling back to. There was something off about it, not the condition, but the configuration. It didn't match the schematics she'd found online. This bus had been modified, not by amateurs. The wire harness had extra shielding, and someone had reinforced the firewall with a plate of steel not included in the factory model. The mountings for the air intake looked newer, like they'd been swapped in from a different spec vehicle. She took photos, cross-referenced them with archived tech manuals. She stayed up until 2 a.m. researching variant engine builds used in classified transport vehicles. What she found made her blood run cold. A series of 1,994 Hyundai Aero units had been retrofitted by a joint humanitarian military operation. Their mission? Transport high-risk civilians through conflict zones. Minimal records. No serials. Unofficial. Their files had been buried so deep that even the manuals had been misfiled under experimental. But Riley knew now. This wasn't a city bus. It had been a ghost ship on wheels, the kind used when the paperwork didn't want to exist. The next day, a neighbor dropped by with donuts. Said his cousin had worked at the old army depot before it shut down. Riley hesitated, then asked if he knew anyone who used to service buses, the big ones. Government ones. His eyes lit up. "You want Lenny Flores, old-timer. Lives out by the water tower. He knows every bolt that's ever sat in an engine bay," she called. Lenny answered like he was expecting her. "I heard you found the white ghost." He came by that afternoon, slow and quiet, with sun-spotted hands and a ball cap so old the logo had peeled off. He didn't ask for coffee, didn't ask for permission, just walked straight to the front of the bus, leaned over the open engine, and stared for a long time. Finally, he said, "I installed this alternator. Back in '96. They said we weren't supposed to write anything down. No records, no VIN swaps, just upgrades. Armor undercarriage, bigger cooling systems, fuel cell dampeners." Riley blinked. "Why?" He looked up at her, eyes sharp. "Because if this thing got caught in the wrong place, they wanted the driver to make it out, and everyone else inside." They worked together the rest of the day, Lenny pointing, Riley wrenching. He told her the stories he wasn't supposed to remember. Convoys without insignias, fuel depots with no listed coordinates, buses that weren't on any map except for the ones etched into the memories of those who made it out alive. And when Lenny left, he turned at the door and said, "You're not just rebuilding a bus, kid. You're resurrecting a secret." And Riley knew he was right, because under all the rust and silence and rot was something that still had power. The next morning came quiet and gray, with mist curling low over the pavement outside the shop like the world itself was holding its breath. Riley stepped into the garage with a coffee in one hand and a journal in the other, not for repairs this time, but for notes. Everything she'd uncovered so far felt like pieces of a map, and she was determined to find the full route. The steel bones of the Hyundai loomed before her, half-stripped, windows out, floor panels peeled, but beneath the chaos of tools and parts was the hum of purpose. This wasn't random anymore. She was chasing something that wanted to be remembered. She started cataloging everything. The modified alternator, the reinforced undercarriage, the spare air filter crammed behind the fuse box. Lenny had confirmed it. This bus had been built for survival. But for who? And why? That's when she found the folder wedged inside the base of the driver's seat, a section she'd nearly missed. The panel had been sealed with a hidden clip, cleverly built into the seat's anchor rail. She pried it loose with the flat end of a screwdriver. Out slid a thin manila envelope, brittle with time. She opened it on the workbench, and her heart began to pound. Inside was the final manifest, typed, stamped, and signed. 28 names, ages, dates of boarding, all dated the 17th of June, 1997. The heading read, "Unsafe route. Do not delay. Mission, evacuation. Clearance, black card level." She scanned the names. Some had no last name, just initials. Others were crossed out, with no explanation. But there, fourth from the bottom, was a name she recognized. Mylin Tran, her mother's maiden name. She stared at it, breath frozen in her throat. This wasn't a guess anymore. This was proof. Her mother had been on this bus. She flipped the page. On the back was a handwritten message. Her father's writing, again. Passenger #4 carried her daughter. Said she didn't cry once. Said the baby smiled the whole way. Like she knew. Riley sat back hard in the chair, hand to her mouth. That baby, it had to be her. The timeline lined up. Her mother would have been 19. Riley would have been months old. Which meant that her first moments of memory, her first silent breaths of freedom, had happened right here on this bus. She stood slowly, walking back to the vehicle like she was approaching a temple. She climbed the steps and looked down the aisle, imagining it full people clutching what little they had, holding hands, holding in fear, riding through jungles and danger and checkpoints. Without certainty, they'd live to see sunrise. She touched the railing beside the entry and whispered, "You carried them all." And in that moment, Riley knew exactly what this build had become. Not a restoration project, not a curiosity, but a monument on wheels, a rolling archive of lives that mattered, stories that had no place in textbooks, but every place in memory. And if no one else would tell the world what this bus had done, she would, with every bolt, every weld, every single mile left to go. Riley didn't wait for the weekend. She started the rebuild that night, the moment the final manifest was tucked safely in a fireproof box, and her hands stopped shaking. This was no longer just about honoring her curiosity, it was about honoring them. The 28 lives on that list. The unnamed drivers, her mother, her infant self. Every decision now had weight. Every bolt turned wasn't just for structure, it was for memory. So she stripped the bus down to its skeleton and began the sacred work of bringing it back. She started with the frame, a wire brush, then a grinder, then rust treatment in every crevice she could reach. Lenny dropped by again to help with the frame welds, shaking his head in amazement. Never seen anyone bring one of these back from that deep. She smiled. It's not just for show. And Lenny didn't ask what that meant. He could see it in her eyes. Word continued to spread. Not about the manifest, that secret was still hers, but about the girl restoring a forgotten bus with purpose in her step and something untouchable in her stare. Soon, people began offering things. Mrs. Garrison from the diner donated old seat upholstery foam. Luis, who ran a metal shop down the street, offered to laser-cut new panels if she brought the specs. Even the high school auto shop class came by one afternoon, wide-eyed and silent, just to watch her work. Inside the bus, Riley reinstalled the subfloor, reinforcing it with modern materials, but left one panel loose, marked with a brass plaque. Beneath it, a copy of the manifest, sealed in plastic. Just in case the world ever needed reminding again. She chose a soft, weathered white for the exterior. Not glossy, not flashy, like it remembered what it had seen. She left a single rust line visible beneath the driver's window, tracing down like a scar. Some wounds weren't meant to be hidden. Some were the proof you'd made it through. One evening, As the paint dried and the smell of fresh vinyl filled the shop, her mother came by unannounced. She stood in the doorway, quiet, arms crossed like a woman still deciding whether to run or weep. Riley said nothing, just stepped aside. Her mother climbed the steps of the bus slowly. She walked the aisle, touched the metal rails, sat down in the third row, the row Riley now knew was hers. Then, after what felt like forever, she whispered, "It was raining." The driver never spoke. He just drove. No lights, no roads, just trees and silence. But I knew we were safe. I knew we'd live. Riley sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. There was nothing left to say. That night, Riley installed the engine. It roared not loud, but alive, like something pulled back from the edge of forgetting. She stood in the garage alone after the shop light clicked off, the bus gleaming in the dark behind her. And in the stillness, she felt it. Not pride, not relief, but reverence. The steel box had been sitting under her workbench for days. Riley hadn't touched it since she first found it, taped beneath the hidden compartment in the bus's floor. She told herself she was too busy with welds to finish, wiring to run, panels to sand, but the truth was, she wasn't ready. She didn't want to open it until the bus felt alive again, until it could witness its own story being told. And now, with the engine purring, the lights wired, and the seats bolted into place, the moment had finally come. She set the box down gently. Its black paint was flaking, corners dented, but the lock had held. No combination, just an old-school keyhole. She stared at it for a while before remembering the key she'd found tucked inside the driver's armrest, wrapped in a cloth labeled Admin. She slid it into the lock. Click. Inside were bundles of folded letters, yellowed with age, bound together with twine. No official stamps, no envelopes, just raw pages, worn by time and tears. She lifted one. The handwriting was careful, looping, and full of emotion. The first line read, "To the woman who sang on the long road, I still hear your voice." Riley read in silence as the rain began to fall softly on the roof above. The letters were love notes. Notes passed between two passengers during the evacuation. One written in fluent English, the other scribbled in careful Laotian with soft translations beneath. They had fallen in love on that bus, in fear, in silence, in survival. No names, just initials, M and K. Letter after letter, they wrote about things they couldn't say aloud. The fear of being found. The children asleep in their laps. The soldier with the scar who nodded them through a checkpoint with no questions. The way her hand brushed his when they passed food down the aisle. The promise they made in the final letter. "If we live, I'll find you." Riley's throat tightened as she reached the last page. It was dated a month after the evacuation, written from a refugee center in Thailand. "I haven't found you yet. But if someone is reading this, if this bus is still around, then maybe you lived, and maybe you're still singing." She stared at the letter for a long time, eyes wet, heart aching for two people she would never know but who had left their fingerprints in the seams of a vehicle that refused to be forgotten. Riley tucked the letters back inside the box and closed it gently. The next day, she installed a small brass compartment under the third seat, watertight, bolted down, invisible to most. Inside it, she placed the letters, sealed in plastic, along with a copy of the final manifest and a note of her own. "If you're reading this, the road lives on." This bus was never just steel. It was love. It was escape. It was survival. Tell someone. Let them remember. Because some stories weren't meant for headlines. Some stories were meant for hands and hearts, and a girl with a wrench, a memory, and just enough fire to bring them back. The day the bus finally rolled out of the shop, the whole town showed up. Not because Riley had asked them to, but because word had spread. About the bus, about the restoration, about why it mattered, even if the full truth still lived quietly inside her drawer. People brought folding chairs, held up their kids, took photos with trembling hands. Some just stood there, quiet, as if waiting for a ghost to appear in the aisle. The paint gleamed soft white under the fall Sunday. The scar of rust below the window caught the light just enough to show its story. The wheels had been rebuilt, the engine tuned to a quiet rumble. But it wasn't what looked new that made people stare, it was what felt ancient, reverent, like the bus had come back not from the scrapyard, but from something deeper. Riley stepped out wearing her dad's old shop jacket. She didn't say anything, just walked to the door, opened it, and gestured toward the steps. A few people stepped forward slowly at first. One was an older woman who gripped the railing like it was a sacred relic. Another was a man who looked up at the ceiling as he entered, whispering a name no one else heard. Then came the families. Not strangers, but descendants of the manifest. After weeks of careful outreach, gentle phone calls, and quiet questions, Riley had found them. Sons, daughters, grandchildren. She didn't give them all the letters, but she gave them what mattered. Proof that someone remembered, that what had happened mattered, that it still mattered. She offered them a ride, not a parade, not a ceremony, just a drive. One route, one road. The same one their families had taken out of danger nearly 3 decades ago, from the edge of the valley to the old train line that once carried refugees west. The route was long, quiet, flanked by pine and memory. Riley sat behind the wheel. No fanfare, no announcements. Just ignition, breath, and movement. The bus creaked like it was waking from a dream. The gears clicked into place. And then, it moved. Softly at first, then stronger. Trees passed. Sunlight flickered through the windows. Wind whispered through the open vents. No one spoke. Not at first. But then, a girl in the back began to hum. A simple melody. One passed down, maybe, without anyone knowing where it had come from. Riley glanced in the mirror. The older woman who had first boarded was humming too. Same melody, same rhythm. And just like that, the aisle was full again. Not with fear. Not with silence. But with something that felt like home. When they reached the overlook near the old rail line, Riley parked. The passengers stepped out one by one. Some took photos. Some cried. One man knelt and placed a photo in the grass. A young couple, mid-journey, mid-century, mid-miracle. And Riley stood beside the bus, hands in her pockets, watching the generations it had carried once as cargo, now as legacy. Because this wasn't a memorial parked in some museum. It was living proof. Still rolling. Still remembering. Still ready for whatever came next. The garage felt different now. Not just cleaner or quieter, but settled, like the bus had finally exhaled after decades of holding its breath. Riley still opened up shop at 6 every morning, still brewed coffee strong enough to peel paint, still wiped her hands on the same grease-stained towel she'd had since her teens. But something had shifted. Her shoulders were looser. Her pace was slower, not from exhaustion, from clarity, because she finally knew what she was building. And it had never just been engines. The bus sat parked under the overhang out front, polished, lettered in simple script. The memory route. No fanfare, no decals. Just the truth. People came from out of town now, teachers, veterans, families with names that matched the manifest. Some wrote it. Some just sat in the seats and listened. Others ran their fingers along the windows like they were tracing the past. Riley never charged. She didn't need to. She started a program. Quietly. One Saturday a month, she ran a workshop not just for mechanics, but for anyone who wanted to learn how to rebuild something. Engines, yes, but also confidence, dignity, memory. She called it hands-on hope. It caught on faster than she expected. High schoolers, grandfathers, women who said they'd always wanted to work with tools, but were told they weren't built for it. Riley didn't give speeches. She just handed them wrenches. And at the end of every session, she told them one thing. If something's worth remembering, it's worth rebuilding. Her mom came often now, sometimes just to sit in the 3rd row and drink tea in silence. Once, she brought a letter. One Riley had never seen before, written by her father the week after they'd arrived in the States. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was more like a prayer. If she ever finds this bus again, may she know that her hands were always meant to carry stories. Riley framed it, hung it above the toolboard. Sometimes, on slow evenings, she took the bus out alone. No destination, just open road and soft jazz on the dash speaker. She'd watch the horizon roll past, hand resting on the gear shift, knowing the machine beneath her wasn't just metal and wire. It was soul. It was the proof that forgotten things, broken things, used up things could still hold beauty if someone believed in them long enough. And when she parked it back at the garage, she'd sit in the driver's seat for a few extra minutes, letting the engine tick cool, letting the silence speak, because she understood now, this wasn't a comeback story. It was a continuation. The rust didn't ruin it, it recorded it, and for every mile that bus traveled, every life it had carried, every secret it had sealed in steel, Riley had given it a second chance, and maybe, just maybe, it had given her one too.